Okay, good evening. This is the LaRouche Pack Monday night strategic overview. It's December 18th. We're kind of getting close to wrapping up 2023. We have Barbara Boyd tonight. She's just published an important review of the last week's intense activities in Washington that show a surge of patriotic victories and maybe hopefully a sign to come of what 2024 represents. So Barbara's going to speak to that and more. And then following Barbara's remarks, I may have some questions for her. We're also asking you to participate. Raise your hand and join us in direct dialogue with Barbara regarding any questions you might have on this topic. So Barbara, why don't you give us your thoughts and take it away? Just unmute first.
There we go.
Yeah, great.
All right. So what I said in my piece is that last week, in a certain sense, really represented a turning point in our battle for the Republic. And I say that not because somehow the air is clear, the enemy has stopped shooting, and we can all breathe a sigh of relief. That's not what I'm talking about. They're still shooting. They're going to continue to shoot. That's all they've got. But what is happening on our side at this point is a pretty well-informed counteroffensive. And what I basically referenced in my piece is three major developments. The first is Donald Trump's attempt to appeal the absolutely ridiculous decision in the DC District Court to say that he is not immune as president for actions committed while in office. And, basically what Jack Smith and the special prosecutor and the attempt to take him down in general is arguing is that we have to have a trial of Trump beginning in March of 2024. We're going to tie him up, at least the schedule as it was, in jury selection all of February. We'll start the trial, on March 4th, basically the day before the Super Tuesday primaries. And we'll tie him up that way. And in a basically fixed case with a rabid jury and a equally rabid judge, we'll get him convicted and more or less send him off to jail with a massive propaganda onslaught to accompany that. And that's really our schedule. That's what we want to do. And that whole schedule went poof, just blew up. Because what happened was that Trump simply appealed his immunity order. Jack Smith freaked out and basically said, oh no, if he appeals it, which is his right and is really a appeal which is quite worthy since it's never been decided in United States history. It has never happened that we've indicted a president of the United States for actions that they took while in office. And this is a really big constitutional issue. So what Jack Smith said is, oh my God, the trial date is in issue. We're screwed. I'm going to go completely around the Court of Appeals, which is where it would go. And I'm going to go directly to the Supreme Court. And it was such a panicked move that virtually everybody in the world recognized, even the Washington Post, that this guy is conducting a purely political prosecution. All of the veneer which had been on this case is off. It's very clear what the game plan is here. And, that's point number one. The trial date went poof because Judge Chutkan, who was the other end of this combo, who's after Trump in DC, had to admit that simply by appealing it, it divested her of all jurisdiction. She can't conduct the pretrial at this point. And now we're going to see massive pressure put on the Supreme Court, which is already going on. They're attacking the court like crazy. They're calling on Justice Thomas to recuse himself. They issued a whole diatribe in the New York Times about the decision-making process around Roe versus Wade, which is an attack on the court itself, with people leaking emails and all sorts of stuff designed to get the justices to be at each other's throats. But the bottom line here is that March 4th trial date is completely up in the air. Now, the second thing that happened, and this also involves the Supreme Court, is that the Supreme Court accepted the appeal of 3 of the J6ers who had been convicted under this completely new and strange use of what's called the Sarbanes-Oxley obstruction of justice statute. That is a statute which was designed to cover financial fraud investigations in the wake of Enron and Arthur Andersen and all of that other good stuff, and prevent people from destroying their financial records in investigations. It carries a 20-year sentence, which is why the prosecutors have twisted it, turned it, and adopted it to apply to what is at worst a political riot, what is, really, in our view, a completely staged Fed surrection designed to take out Trump pursuant to a plan which had been being worked out throughout all of 2020, which I go into in my piece, the Transition Integrity Project, and what they had actually planned had Trump won the election so overwhelmingly that they would have had to recognize it. They actually planned to take him out with a military coup and street riots. That was literally what they had planned. So the Supreme Court accepted certiorari on that, and the likelihood is that they're going to overturn the use of that statute. Now, that statute is 2 of the counts in Trump's DC indictment. It is also the thing which has put the J6ers in jail for long prison terms. It was used by this horrible, I won't use the language which I should use to describe her, woman judge in DC by the name of Beryl Howell, to say if they're indicted under this part of the statute, they should go into pretrial detention and stay there. That's how she justified actually putting people who'd been trespassing at worst into prison for maximum pretrial terms in an overall effort to break them. So if the Supreme Court acts as it should, about 325 of these convictions will also go poof. And along with the poof will go the reputations of almost every sitting judge in the Washington, D.C. District Court. Kash Patel, in his book, Government Gangsters, actually says, we've got to do something about this particular court. We've got to actually impeach the judges on this particular court because all of them are corrupt. They're the people who ran and tolerated the Mueller investigation. They're the people who have tolerated this atrocity, this legal atrocity around January 6th. One judge, Carl Nichols, said, no, this statute is wholly inappropriate for this political circumstance, cannot be applied, and is constitutionally suspect, which it is. It's unconstitutional. So if the court has the guts, which it should, and it has done this on other occasions, if you recall, it completely overturned the Enron prosecutions of Arthur Andersen, literally after the entire company had been bankrupted and gone out of existence, but nonetheless, actually overturned that after a multitude of courts said this was perfectly okay. That particular prosecution, just as a side note, is where Andrew Weissman and all of the creeps that we actually see working in the Trump insurrection against the president, the actual insurrection against President Trump, that's where they all sort of cut their teeth. So those are 2 of the developments I cited. In addition, Clay Higgins, the representative from Louisiana, sat down with Laura Logan and went through what's being discovered as Congress goes through the actual footage from the Capitol, which was not, released by McCarthy, is being released slowly by Mike Johnson, not fast enough. And he says that he can actually pinpoint 2 ghost buses full of federal agents, which came on the scene at 5 o'clock in the morning. He has people on tape changing from what looks like a normal law enforcement uniform into Trump regalia and back again inside the Capitol. He has agents inside the Capitol who he thinks came from these buses just as Trump was actually finishing his speech on the ellipse. It is a dynamite interview, and you can actually look at it if you haven't in my piece, which is posted now on the website. So that's the other thing that happened. Similarly, Elise Stefanik, the third ranking member of the House at this point, the Congresswoman from New York, filed an ethics complaint against Beryl Howell, the judge in the DC court that I was telling you about, sort of the chief witch, if you will, of that courthouse, the woman who has done more than anything from the bench to orchestrate Trump's present indictments. She's the one who actually, forced his lawyers to turn state's evidence in violation of the Sixth Amendment. She's the one who constructed special rules for the January 6th, detainees and ordered them detained. She's the one who supervised the grand jury in the Mueller inquisition against Trump. In other words, she is an overall central player in this coup. And what, basically Congresswoman Stefanik caught her doing was buddying it up in a love fest with her pals at this event called the Women's White Collar Defense Bar, where Lisa Monaco, the deputy AG, was there. Beryl Howell gave a speech in which she cited, a book which basically says that the United States is going to be authoritarian under Trump. It is a vicious anti-Trump screed. She herself, in her speech, without ever mentioning Trump's name, said the country is going authoritarian, and that requires, essentially drastic measures coming from the courts. And she was hailed as a hero by, none other than Lisa Monaco, Catherine Rumsmiller, who was, Barack Obama's White House counsel, a very, very close friend of Obama's, actually got herself into all sorts of trouble around Jeffrey Epstein after she left the White House and moved over to JP Morgan Chase. But, essentially, this was a love fest of the women who played the key role in the, prosecution of Trump, with the judge who played the key role in orchestrating these indictments. It's a very, very important ethics complaint. Judges are not allowed, under the ethics rules, to give the appearance that they're supporting anybody's agenda, and they must always at least appear to be completely impartial. So it has teeth, and it's a first step towards exactly what we need to do in terms of talking about impeachment at this point of judges. Finally, there's a very interesting complaint against Jack Smith himself. And it led me to ask the question in my post, who really is this guy? Who is he really working for? I think that's a very legitimate question. The whistleblower campaign is by John Moynihan, who some of you on this call may know. Larry Johnson is someone we've cited often in terms of his analyses of the international situation, his analyses of the coup against Trump, and otherwise. He's a former DEA agent, Moynihan, and is considered to be one of the world's leading experts on money laundering and organized crime. And what he says, with affidavits backing it up, in this piece, which he has put before the inspector generals of the CIA, the intelligence community itself, the Office of Professional Responsibility of the Justice Department, what he says is going on is that when Jack Smith was over in Kosovo, remember, he went from a disastrous career as head of the public integrity section of the Justice Department, where he did the prosecution of Bob McDonald, which was reversed 9-0 by the Supreme Court. He also did the prosecution of John Edwards, which ended up in a jury verdict for acquittal and an otherwise hung jury and could never be brought again. He has a reputation here for being a thug, but what he did in Europe is extraordinary, at least if this complaint is to be believed. And that is that as the, basically NATO and the British forced the country of Kosovo to establish a special counsel's office to handle war crimes which occurred in the long ago, decades ago, Serbia, Kosovo, Balkans, overall war back during the Clinton administration, the Bush administration going forward. Obviously, the Balkans have been a flashpoint, just like the Israel-Palestinian flashpoint for keeping certain areas of the world in geopolitical conflict, for centuries, really. And the war in the Balkans, you could almost say that Kosovo was the Ukraine of its day. In other words, it was a proxy for the British and for U.S. intelligence efforts. It was infamous in the War on Terror because it largely supplied the arms and the money laundering facilities for the jihadists who the United States and the British sponsored in the Middle East. So all of a sudden we have this great need to actually have the recounting of war crimes in Kosovo, and Jack Smith is assigned to do it, all of which I believe is very strange in the first instance and points to a British hand. But where it gets stranger even is that what Moynihan said they did was set up an extortion ring through the Kosovo prosecutor's office, where they actually targeted various people and said, if you give us $1 million, and literally the things which went into this black fund, which they had, they called it a black fund, totaled in the millions of dollars, we'll ensure that you aren't prosecuted by Jack Smith in Kosovo. The complaint has Smith actually fabricating evidence in the trial of the current president of Kosovo, who he actually put in jail. And above and beyond that, they were targeting Russian oligarchs through the CIA, according to this complaint. And the way that worked is they basically said, you guys are sanctioned under the present sanction regime, and if you pay us $1 million, $2 million, $17 million, $24 million, we'll get you off the sanctions list. But the caveat here is you got to be a spy for us against Putin. So they actually did this stuff, and it raised the question for me, when you look back at Christopher Steele and British intelligence's role in Russiagate, which was really an operation against both President Trump and against Russia. His entire business model for his firm was, doing investigations on behalf of Russian oligarchs against other Russian oligarchs, a perfect situation for an intelligence operative to spy massively. And the question which was raised for me by this Moynihan complaint is this really British intelligence that we're talking about here? And who is Jack Smith really working for? Particularly given the prior involvement, the heavy prior involvement of the British in the effort to take down Trump. They came out in the open and said it in 2018 when they published the House of Lords report, which essentially said we can contain Trump for one term. They actually said this stuff, but we can't for two. Therefore, every effort has to be made to ensure that he does not have a second term. This is the highest level of the oligarchy speaking through the British House of Lords at that point in December of 2018. Now, what struck me in all of this is that we're finally on the offensive, and we're finally getting to the right kind of level in attacking this. And you'll note that we called this and talked about this as being a phenomenon around Executive Order 12333. Now, the reason why 12333 came back on our radar, and it never really left my radar, but it's been there now most prominently, is that when you look at the FISA fight, which occurred also last week, and resulted in Mike Johnson punting, but in a way which could extend the present surveillance regime into 2024, 2025, if it's not stopped. And we'll get to how to stop it pretty quickly here. But essentially, what went on is that there were two bills in the House dealing with this. One was a bill in the Judiciary Committee under Jim Jordan. The other was a bill in the House Intelligence Committee with Mike Turner. Both of them will do nothing to stop the present surveillance regime, even if you got the Judiciary bill. There are some minor lipstick reforms around the FISA surveillance aspects of surveillance itself in the Judiciary Committee bill, but nothing that's going to attack what we're all undergoing and experiencing as being spied on 24 hours a day with everything we do. I contrast that with the bill in the Senate by Ron Paul. And what he says is just get rid of 702, forget about it. Go back to the Fourth Amendment. What does the Fourth Amendment say? You want to surveil an American? You better be an American, and you better do it under the Fourth Amendment. And you better go get a warrant from a regular U.S. District Court judge. And we did perfectly well under that system until the present mode of FISA was put into play the way that it works now, starting in 1978, but really accelerated under the Patriot Act. But FISA is not where the bodies are buried, so to speak. And what Rand Paul's bill does, which nobody else does, is he outlaws surveillance of Americans under Executive Order 12333. Now, what is that? What are we talking about here? Well, this was an executive order put into place in the Reagan administration, written by a character by the name of Kenneth DeGraff and Reed, but actually very much pushed by the Bush apparatus to completely and totally undermine the regime, the lawful regime, which actually came out of the Church Committee, and tried to get a handle on all of these intelligence agencies and tried to stop all of the things which people know about in terms of the effort to get Martin Luther King to commit suicide, the West Coast shootout between us and the Black Panther Party for self-defense, which basically killed a lot of people, the killing of Fred Hampton, all of the things which, going back obviously to the assassination operations, including the assassination of JFK. And so what 12333 does is two things. One is it's the overall structure for the entire U.S. intelligence community. And it allowed for the first time, and most people would argue this is where the disaster struck, it allowed for the first time for the intelligence community to privatize its operations, to use private corporations, private individuals, private groupings as deputies of the intelligence community in intelligence operations officially. Now that it had been done obviously previously, but it also added a kicker, which is these relationships between the official intelligence community, and we'll call them the dark Black intelligence community, as in Black operations, you can lie about that. If somebody asks you, does this relationship exist? 12333 says you don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to admit the relationship. And in fact, if push comes to shove, you can actually say, no, it does not exist because you're protecting sources and methods. Second, the second thing it did is that it set up the entire regime of surveillance, foreign and domestic, under the National Security Agency. So when you go to the NSA, almost all of their operations are not conducted under FISA, and this whole FISA fight, in many respects, is a fraud. Now, to show you how this worked, I'm just going to give you a little bit of the situation around Lyndon LaRouche and his prosecution, and tie that a little bit to what happened to Donald Trump. Because, you know, most people know about the Carter Page warrant, the phony warrant before the FISA court. What has not been explored, and which I believe to be the central issue in the entire operation conducted to date against Trump, is it's not been conducted under FISA or 702. It's been conducted under EO 12333. Now, the prosecutions against LaRouche, really kicked off following his negotiations with the Soviets on behalf of the Reagan administration. He was asked by Ronald Reagan to essentially be the back channel to negotiate the Strategic Defense Initiative with the Russians. The Russians came back and said, no, we're not doing that. We continued, and LaRouche continued to campaign to actually build the SDI. And it was very much what Reagan wanted to do in the form of grand politics. But it drove the British agents within the Reagan administration absolutely nuts. Henry Kissinger was livid that Lyndon LaRouche was walking into the White House. He was livid that Lyndon LaRouche was meeting with the National Security Council of the United States. So the order went out, essentially, we need to get this guy out of the picture. And the way that they did that will remind you of certain things very clearly that have occurred with Trump. The first was to put together an entire media operation through a guy by the name of John Train, a Wall Street financier, but also a longtime bagman for George H.W. Bush and the Bush family oil operations and CIA operations in Texas. And John Train invited all of the major media to a series of salons which were held, which we knew about or learned about through one of the participants, involving both government officials, official government people from the National Security Council and other places, the media, and most prominently, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. And there ensued an insane series of horrible ID format slanders against Lyndon LaRouche, turning him into the equivalent of a monster who no one would want to have anything to do with. Very, very similar to the operation they've run against Trump. And that was done under EO 12333. Remember what I said, for the first time, the official deputization of private parties in major covert intelligence operations. The second was the role of the British. Now, it took us a long time to actually, under the Freedom of Information Act, actually unearth this stuff. But, we had diligently litigated FOIA cases, and we found out that, basically the president's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, at that point with Kissinger and David Abshire, and, all sorts of other, Leo Chern, all sorts of others, major intelligence domas, and Kissinger himself through the Justice Department, were calling for LaRouche's head. And the way they formulated it to get it under 12333 is they said the stuff that he's doing could be propitious to Soviet propaganda interests. Now think about Russiagate. What triggers 12333 is the idea that you are either a foreign spy or being used by a foreign nation, which is an adversary of the United States. So Russiagate was essentially designed to be both a myth journalistically, but also to trigger the extraordinary types of, surveillance, black bag jobs, everything illegal that you could name, up to including assassinations. At the same time this was going on, George H.W. Bush was actually running an off-the-books assassination operation through the Special Forces and JSOC and a Navy character by the name of Arthur Moreau. This is all revealed by Seymour Hersh in an article for the London Review of Books called "All the Vice President's Men." So, you get a sense now of what this 12333 is. The fact that Ron Paul is bringing it up and mentioning it is a huge breakthrough. Edward Snowden, when he did his revelation, said, "Look, this is where the bodies are buried, folks. Why don't you go after it?" Nobody did. Bill Binney, said the same thing. This is where the bodies are buried, folks. You've got to go after this. This is how they're doing things. But nothing has happened in the Congress. The Senate Intelligence Committee at one point actually did an investigation of 12333 under Dianne Feinstein when she was not already completely compromised. And essentially that entire investigation has been classified and has never seen the light of day. So this is very, very, very significant in my, humble opinion, because we're now getting to where the skeletons actually reside. When the Church Committee happened, William Colby, who was assassinated, I believe, for doing this, told the Church Committee many things about the so-called family jewels of the Intelligence Committee. Pulling up this cover of 12333 pulls up all of the nasty stuff you can feasibly imagine, including the stuff against President Trump. Now, after many years, finally through some kind of declassification review from our FOIA people working on it, we found out what actually instigated all of the investigation of Lyndon LaRouche under 12333. And while we had thought it was Kissinger, and we had thought it was Pipiab, that was only the afterthought, because the way this thing was actually, centrally called for was the British called for it, sending, a note to William Nolan of the FBI. He's not just a regular FBI guy at the time. He was James Jesus Angleton's FBI coordinating center, and saying this guy LaRouche has to be gone after. You've got John Brennan saying that as of 2015, and when Trump first walked down the escalator at Trump Tower, what happened was the British were demanding almost immediately that he be gone after for his, quote, Russian ties. Hillary Clinton was saying the same thing. WikiLeaks released John Podesta's account of that, saying we've got to smear Trump with the Russia brush. But you see, smearing him with the Russia brush actually creates the context for massive illegal operations, which no court, no matter how bad in the United States, would ever countenance. So this being raised at this point means to me that we're finally on the right footing in a counterattack which can actually get somewhere. And I'll leave my remarks at that and sort of open mic up for questions you might have, et cetera.